The clock is ticking toward what may become the most dangerous deadline the Middle East has faced in decades. Within hours, the United States has threatened to erase critical infrastructure across Iran unless Tehran agrees to terms that many analysts say would represent total strategic surrender. Iran has rejected those terms outright. What happens next could reshape the entire region and send shockwaves through global energy markets, international security frameworks, and the fragile balance of power that has held for over 40 years. This is not a drill. This is not rhetoric. This is a collision course between two nations that have reached the absolute limit of diplomatic maneuvering, and the consequences of failure are almost unthinkable. According to multiple international media reports, the United States extended a final ultimatum to Iran on April 7, 2025. The deadline was set for early morning hours, and the terms were stark. President Trump demanded the immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz without preconditions, the suspension of all missile launches targeting Israel and regional U.S. assets, and the beginning of talks aimed at dismantling Iran's nuclear enrichment program. In return, Washington offered a 45-day ceasefire. Iranian leadership, according to statements from officials in Tehran, rejected the proposal and instead presented a 10-point counterproposal that included a permanent end to hostilities, full withdrawal of all U.S. and allied forces from the region, lifting of all economic sanctions, international guarantees against future strikes, and reparations for infrastructure damage. The gap between these positions is not just wide. It is a chasm that reflects two entirely incompatible strategic visions. Understanding why this moment matters requires understanding what led to it. The current crisis began weeks ago when a series of escalating strikes between Israel, the United States, and Iran turned a simmering conflict into an open regional war. Iranian missile forces have repeatedly targeted Israeli infrastructure and U.S. naval assets. In response, American and Israeli air forces have conducted deep penetration strikes into Iranian territory, targeting petrochemical facilities, missile production centers, and underground command bunkers. On April 7th alone, Israeli Defense Forces announced they had completed a massive synchronized air campaign that struck industrial complexes in Shiraz, ballistic missile sites in northwestern Iran, and critical transportation infrastructure, including rail networks used to move military equipment. These were not symbolic strikes. They were designed to cripple Iran's ability to sustain prolonged military operations. But Iran has not backed down. Despite suffering severe losses to its military infrastructure, Tehran has continued launching missiles and drones toward Israeli territory and U.S. positions in the Gulf. According to Reuters, Iranian forces claimed they targeted the USS Tripoli, an American amphibious assault ship operating in the region. U.S. Central Command denied the claim and stated the vessel continued normal operations. This pattern of claim and counterclaim has become standard in this conflict, where information itself has become a weapon. Both sides are fighting not just with missiles and aircraft, but with narratives designed to shape perceptions, maintain morale, and justify escalation to domestic and international audiences. The strategic stakes are enormous. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed to commercial shipping, and global oil prices have surged as a result. Roughly 1/5 of the world's petroleum passes through that narrow waterway under normal conditions. Its closure has disrupted supply chains, increased costs for consumers worldwide, and forced major economies to tap strategic reserves. For Iran, control of the strait represents its last major leverage point. Tehran knows that once it reopens the waterway, it loses the one card that forces the international community to pay attention. For the United States, the closure represents an unacceptable challenge to freedom of navigation and a direct threat to allied economies that depend on Gulf energy exports. This is why Washington has framed the reopening of Hormuz as a non-negotiable first step. From the American perspective, nothing else can be discussed until that choke point is cleared. But there is another layer to this crisis that goes beyond military strikes and economic pressure. According to a report published by the Times of London, Western intelligence agencies believe that Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, is incapacitated and possibly in a coma following injuries sustained in a strike on February 28. The report, allegedly based on classified intelligence shared with Gulf allies, claims that Khamenei is being treated in a secure medical facility in the city of Qom, about 90 miles south of Tehran. The choice of location is significant. Qom is one of the holiest cities in Shia Islam and home to major religious seminaries. Iranian security forces reportedly chose the location assuming its religious significance would deter American or Israeli strikes. If true, this would represent a profound constitutional crisis for the Islamic Republic. The supreme leader holds ultimate authority over all matters of state, military, and foreign policy. His incapacitation would leave a vacuum at the top of the decision-making structure. According to the same intelligence assessment, real power in Iran has shifted to a small circle of commanders within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The most prominent figure is General Mohammad Vahidi, who reportedly assumed command of the IRGC after his predecessor was killed in earlier strikes. Alongside him are Mohammad Bakr Ghalibaf, recently appointed Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, and Mohsen Rezai, a senior military advisor who controls the security cordon around Qom. If this reporting is accurate, it means that Iran is effectively being governed by a military junta operating under the legal fiction that the supreme leader remains in control. The Iranian president Masoud Pezeshkian has reportedly been sidelined and denied access to Khamenei. This internal power struggle complicates diplomacy even further because it is unclear who in Tehran actually has the authority to agree to a ceasefire or make strategic concessions. Western officials have reportedly communicated directly with Iranian representatives through the Pakistani embassy in Washington, which has handled U.S. interests in Iran since the severing of diplomatic relations decades ago. But the responses from Tehran have been inconsistent, leading some analysts to believe that different factions within the Iranian leadership are sending conflicting signals. Some may favor a negotiated pause to regroup and rebuild. Others, particularly hardline IRGC commanders, may view any compromise as capitulation that would undermine their legitimacy and invite internal challenges. In a system where power is contested and the ultimate arbiter is unable to function, decision-making becomes paralyzed or dominated by the most aggressive voices. Amid this political uncertainty, another strange episode has added fuel to the information war. On April 3rd, a U.S. F-15 fighter jet was shot down over Iranian territory. The aircraft had a two-person crew. The pilot was rescued within hours in a daring daylight operation. But the weapons systems officer remained missing for nearly 50 hours. According to the Pentagon, a massive rescue mission involving over 150 aircraft was launched to recover the second airman, who had evaded capture by hiding in mountainous terrain. The operation succeeded on April 5th, and President Trump praised it as one of the most complex rescue missions in military history. But Iranian officials presented a very different narrative. They claimed the rescue operation was a cover story and that the real mission was an attempt by U.S. Special Forces to steal enriched uranium from an Iranian nuclear facility. Iranian state media released photographs of what they said were identification documents recovered from wreckage, including military IDs and passports allegedly belonging to American and Israeli personnel. The claim was explosive, but it raised immediate questions. The crash site was in southwestern Iran, hundreds of miles from any known nuclear facility. Iran's main enrichment sites are located in the Central Plateau region near cities like Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. It is logistically implausible that a rescue team operating in rugged southern mountains could simultaneously conduct a raid on a distant underground bunker, extract heavy containers of uranium hexafluoride gas, and transport them back under fire. Uranium enrichment material is stored in specialized cylinders that weigh hundreds of pounds and require shielding to prevent radiation exposure. Moving such material covertly during an active combat operation would be extraordinarily difficult and dangerous. American officials dismissed the Iranian story as disinformation designed to rally domestic support and justify further escalation. But the fact that the story gained traction, particularly on social media, shows how deeply the information environment has been weaponized in this conflict. What makes this moment so dangerous is not just the military dimension, but the collapse of any shared understanding of reality. Both sides are operating in parallel information universes. Each attributes the worst possible motives to the other. Trust, already minimal, has evaporated completely, and in that environment, miscalculation becomes much more likely. A defensive move by one side can be interpreted as preparation for attack by the other. A delay in communication can be seen as a refusal to negotiate. The fog of war is thickened by the fog of propaganda, and decisions are being made at the highest levels based on incomplete, contradictory, or deliberately false information. So what happens next? As the deadline approaches, there are essentially three possible scenarios. The first is a last-minute diplomatic breakthrough. This would require one side to make a significant concession that changes the calculus. Perhaps Iran agrees to a partial reopening of Hormuz in exchange for a temporary halt to strikes on its energy infrastructure. Perhaps the United States agrees to a longer ceasefire or offers limited sanctions relief. Such a deal would not resolve the underlying conflict, but it could buy time and create space for broader negotiations. However, given the public commitments both sides have made and the domestic political pressures they face, this scenario seems increasingly unlikely. The second scenario is a limited strike. President Trump has specifically threatened to target power plants and bridges if the deadline passes without agreement. Such strikes would be devastating to Iranian civilian infrastructure and could plunge much of the country into darkness. They would also likely trigger a new wave of Iranian retaliation, possibly including attacks on Gulf oil facilities, U.S. bases, or commercial shipping. This cycle of action and reaction could continue for weeks or months, causing massive humanitarian and economic damage, but stopping short of a full-scale invasion or regime change operation. This is perhaps the most probable scenario because it allows both sides to claim they are acting decisively while avoiding the even greater risks of total war. The third scenario is the one that keeps strategists awake at night. It involves a catastrophic escalation in which one side miscalculates, accidents happen, or hardliners on either side seize control of the narrative. Imagine a scenario in which U.S. strikes cause mass civilian casualties in Iran, leading to domestic pressure on the IRGC to respond with a major attack on a high-value American or allied target. Imagine an Iranian missile hitting a U.S. carrier or a major Saudi oil terminal. Imagine a radiological release at a nuclear site, whether accidental or deliberate, that creates a contamination crisis. Any of these events could spiral into a wider war involving multiple regional actors and potentially drawing in global powers like Russia or China, both of which have strategic interests in Iran and strong reasons to oppose unchecked American military dominance in the region. What is clear is that the Middle East is entering a period of extreme volatility unlike anything seen in decades. The last time the region faced a comparable moment of uncertainty was during the lead-up to the Iraq War in 2003, or perhaps during the Iranian Revolution itself in 1979. But this crisis is different because it involves direct confrontation between the United States and Iran, two nations that have avoided open war for over 40 years despite numerous flashpoints. The rules and red lines that kept that confrontation limited are breaking down. Deterrence is weakening. Communication channels are fraying. And the leadership on both sides is either unable or unwilling to step back from the brink. For the international community, the implications are profound. A prolonged conflict in the Gulf would disrupt global energy markets, threaten shipping routes vital to international trade, destabilize governments across the Middle East, accelerate nuclear proliferation, and undermine already fragile norms around the use of force and respect for sovereignty. It could also embolden other actors to pursue aggressive policies, calculating that the United States is too distracted or overstretched to respond. In many ways, what happens in the next 24 hours will set the tone for global security for years to come. The world is watching. The stakes could not be higher, and the margin for error has never been smaller.